Hello, everyone. It's great to see so many faces here today. The very first thing I'd like to say as somebody from Toronto is that you people in Edmonton have our mayor. I have great mayor envy. Both. I obviously, or maybe not obviously, hadn't seen him speak before, and when he got up to take the podium, I just about started to cry. We had a huge. To talk about Twitter, it went wild on Twitter when Nenshi in Calgary became mayor, and it was the same thing about how did Calgary get our mayor. So, and no, I don't know where Rob Ford actually is. So, I was asked to talk to you today about the Greenbelt Plan that encircles the Toronto area. I am a member of the Greenbelt Council in Ontario. We give advice to the minister on issues pertaining to the Greenbelt Council. I'm not actually a typical council member as kind of an academic and a planner. I'm on the council because I do study Greenbelts and the near urban rural area. We have several farmers on the Greenbelt, and it's my great pleasure to actually be able to work with them. I had a very aspirational title towards the 21st century or something like that. So just ignore that. I decided when it actually came down to it just to tell you about the Greenbelt Plan. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them afterwards. Okay. There's a green button. Ooh. Okay, so here is the outline for my presentation today. I'm going to talk about the plan itself and describe it to you, which is actually turning out to be no mean feat, as you'll be able to see. It is the result of a very big idea from our provincial government at the time, and I'll talk about that. I'll talk about the policy framework and how it works, and then kind of talk about what it's like to have a big idea and have it meet the real world today, and then just talk briefly about what's next. So getting oriented, one of the things that I always like to do is think about the geography of places. So here's Toronto from where we are now. And this is from Google Maps, and I hope that this is correct. I haven't actually been to Westlock myself, but I wanted to just give you a bit of a scale. So when you're looking at the maps of Toronto and you're looking to think about what that's like from your own perspective, I'm hoping that most of you understand Edmonton a little bit. So to go from, on the left is Toronto, and so to go from the CN Tower up to Innisfil, which is just at the top edge of the Greenbelt, is about an hour's drive and no traffic, which is almost never. And from where we are here at the West End up to Westlock is give or take about an hour, and I also assume that's in no traffic or you don't get caught behind some big piece of machinery. So here is the plan, and you'll see why I called it the plans in a second. So here's the Greenbelt Plan. It was passed in 2005, and it is basically a provincial top-down plan for the Greater Toronto Region. And it encircles the area, if you've been to Toronto, not only the City of Toronto, but its suburban municipalities that are around Toronto. It's very large, 730,000 hectares, which is 1.8 million acres altogether. And then I put the blue line in so that you could see the drive as we go. And so the Greenbelt Plan is actually 3 plans in one. And as a planner my whole life, this makes a lot of sense to me. For people who aren't planners, it's one of those moments where I do kind of think that we're crazy. So it is the Greenbelt Plan. It's called a plan, but it's 3 plans. So it is the Niagara Escarpment Plan, which has been in place, and the idea behind it, the act was in 1973, and it took them a while to actually pass the first plan. It's actually overseen by a commission, which sounds similar to the ALR, although I realized I don't know enough about that. And then the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan, which was passed before the Greenbelt Plan in the early 2000s. And the Oak Ridges Marine Plan goes across the top of Toronto. And then finally, what is really the third plan is called the Protected Countryside. And it is the newer part of the Greenbelt Plan. So it was a big idea. The big idea was to stop urban sprawl. It was to protect the countryside from urbanization. It was to ensure that we had conservation of nature in our rural area, and it was to protect agricultural land and the working landscape. And it's a very big idea, because it's a very big political idea. It's an ideology of the way that cities should be and the way that their surrounding countryside should be. And it's one that I'm sure is very familiar to everybody. With my more scholarly hat on, it comes from this idea that people have an ideology about what they think nature should be, or what they think a working landscape should be like. And then they try to take that idea and that ideology and actually make it real in the landscape, so that when you're actually in the landscape, you're looking at it, you're living in it, and you're working in it, is that you're making that ideology real. And so I think that the Greenbelt Plan tried to do all of those things. It's very successful at doing those, and I think that one of the things is that it's so successful that everybody's putting their ideologies for all of those things, which sometimes aren't compatible, into one thing. So here's the challenge between doing something on a Mac and not having it come through, so I apologize. Ebenezer Howard and the idea of greenbelts came from the late 18th century, and this was in response to social conditions in the City of London in England at the time. And if you're a planner, if you've been a planning student, we always read a book called Peter Hall's Cities of Tomorrow, and it's all about that horrible time when people lived in conditions that we couldn't imagine today, both in London and in New York City in the tenements. And there was really a need to intervene, and that's kind of how planning started, for those social reasons. Some of my colleagues who are more interested in thinking about labor and kind of neo-Marxist ideas say that the state intervenes so that there would be a good labor working market, but that's the other side of things. So the Greenbelt idea was very old. It was implemented after World War II by the Abercrombie Plan around Greater London and around other towns and cities in England and Scotland, and they're still there today. And they're very, very contentious. There's a lot of tension about what the Greenbelts should be today, and at the time, when it was passed, there was an idea that the Greenbelt would be an urban containment boundary. The purpose was to disperse people into satellite towns. The purpose wasn't to think about what was going on inside that actual land use designation. So, so Toronto has a very long history of provincial planning, and especially when I speak to people from the United States, as my colleague here today, and others, is that Ontario has a real history of this kind of top-down intervention in local politics. And some people like it and some people hate it. We had Metropolitan Toronto as the first regional municipality in 1953, and in the map, the yellow bits are the greenfield areas. So those would have been farms at the time, but already owned underlying it by speculators thinking about what the next satellite towns would be. There's actually a Greenbelt, that was actually called a Greenbelt back then around the already built up area of Toronto. Conservation authorities, another thing which I think sets Ontario apart. Starting right after the Second World War, there were studies across the province for water quality control and water quantity control, and these turned into conservation authorities not much afterwards, and Hurricane Hazel in 1954 really provided the impetus and the political will to have conservation authorities. So before we begin planning in Ontario, we have already screened out the floodplains and the valley slope lands. Those are already in public ownership for the most part, and so that's already done. So we're beginning with kind of that basis for the ecological planning and riparian habitat conservation. So plans have always shaped the Toronto region. This is in 1970, the Toronto Centred Region Plan, also called Design for Development, had this idea. And this is very similar when I look at it to the Greenbelt Plan. You have the Niagara Escarpment in that crazy green color going north-south, already identified. The Oak Ridges Moraine was already identified back then as something that was important. The Oak Ridges Moraine splits the two watersheds. So everything to the south, all the water drains to the south into Lake Ontario, which is where the Toronto communities get their drinking water from, and everything to the north drains to the north into Lake Simcoe, which is my current study area. But you can imagine that given the density of Toronto, the fact that everybody's drinking water comes from Lake Ontario becomes very important, and where that water comes from is hugely important. In 1992, there was a report called Regeneration, and that was a result of the Royal Commission on the Future of the Toronto Waterfront, or the Crombie Commission. And the purpose of the commission was originally to say the public lands around Lake Ontario need to be looked at, but then it turned into a whole full-scale review of the Toronto bioregion, basically saying that you can't look at the waterfront of the lake without thinking about the whole health of the system quite broadly. And so very often we think of the moment when in people's minds Toronto became a bioregion was because of this report and because of David Crombie, who was a previous mayor of Toronto. So the successful big idea. So I think the Greenbelt Plan has been very successful. The Friends of the Greenbelt Foundation, which is which was set up at the same time as the Greenbelt Plan, basically to be, I call it the heroes of the plan. They were endowed with $25 million twice now, actually, to promote the Greenbelt Plan amongst people. They do intermittent polls of people in the larger Greater Golden Horseshoe, and to have 91% of people say that they agree with the Greenbelt Plan, I think is quite a big deal. So how does it all work? What's the policy framework? This is mostly for you planners out there and for the councillors who are still with me here. So the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe is a companion plan to the Greenbelt Plan. So at the time that the Greenbelt Plan came in, it was seen as one of a suite of initiatives by the provincial government. So we have the Greenbelt Plan, we have the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, which is planning for the lands inside, the urban areas inside the Greenbelt and a little bit outside. Just on the west side, you'll see there's Kitchener-Waterloo. That's also important. So this companion plan is really where a lot of the issues are if you talk to people who are involved in the land development industry in Toronto, because it really has changed the way that we do planning. The Greenbelt Plan has been more benign, and the growth plan has really changed the way that people are doing things, and I can talk about that more if you're interested. The other companion plan is a transportation plan called the Big Move. And the big move is the infrastructure side. We don't have the big water, which is kind of underpinning all of this because it is about where the water's coming from. But the big move is saying that the province is going to invest in infrastructure and how they're going to go about doing it. It is talked about as a transit plan mostly because that's really, 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 really expensive. But it's also the expansion of highways too. So the other part of this, which is also important, is thinking about the entire provincial policy statement. So in Ontario, as a foundation for everything that we do in planning, we always have to say it conforms, addresses, speaks to the provincial policy statement. Every single planning report you open up always says, we want to do this, and the first thing we've looked at is to see whether or not we're consistent or have a regard to or conform with the provincial policy statement. And it has just been updated. And most people seem to be very excited about it, especially in rural areas, because it talks about the fact that we have many different kinds of rural areas, and it seems to be less of an urban-centered approach to thinking about the world than in previous times. Okay, so how does the Greenbelt Plan work? So those are the suite of plans that kind of go along with it. So they are intermixed, and in some ways I'm presenting this as perhaps a little more simplistic than it is when you're in the throes of doing it, but I think most of you understand that. So the plans are implemented at the local level. We have upper and lower tier municipalities. So the upper tier municipalities are the former counties that are now in more urban areas, and lower tier municipalities are the former towns, except it's not just the town, it's also the rural area that was around it, and I'll show you an example in a moment. Greenbelt Plan conformity was easier at the time when it came into place and for people to update their local official plans. The growth plan, though, required some real rethinking about what to do. In Ontario, we have to have a 20-year plan to make sure that you can house people, growth and jobs over the next 20 years. And so there was a lot of, what's the polite word? A lot of arguing over who would get the growth and where that would be. Greenbelt Plan policy. So this is back to the existing plans. So there's a Niagara Escarpment Plan. There is the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan, and they're very different, and I think that this is important. So if you're thinking about how to do countryside conservation, how to think about your rural area, is that there's not a one-size-fits-all. The Niagara Escarpment is an escarpment. It's about this tall, and for people who know the Rocky Mountains, I kind of look at the escarpment and I go, like, what? Why is that important? It's actually, we have Hamilton Mountain, which takes 20 seconds to drive up. It's actually really funny. Nonetheless, it's very important. But it's a landform protection. It's the idea that you'll be able to see the escarpment, and it's the open scenic countryside is what the policy focus on. And those still remain. And the Niagara Escarpment Commission approves plans for change. The Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan is an ecologically based plan. All of the policies are about the ecology. They're about water quality, and they're about the kinds of habitats we want to have in those areas. So everything that you do is about your influence on the environment. And then the protected countryside of the Greenbelt Plan, because it was an idea. So it's not something where you say, that's the countryside, and I'm going to draw a line, and that's not the countryside, although that's the effect, because if we're standing there and you look on both sides of the road, they look very similar. It was a political plan, a political idea, and the boundaries can't be defended in natural scientific terms or even in kind of scenic landscape terms. And so it's actually a fascinating thing, because you can't argue about the boundaries, because they were made based on previous plans, as I showed you, and where the politicians thought, or the staff of the politicians at the province thought that people wouldn't argue about them, basically. There's an agricultural system, a natural system, and settlement areas, and they're all policies that are about having a working landscape, having a countryside, and having places of nature. And so the language is less scientific than, say, in the Oak Ridges Marine Plan. So here's my example. Halton region is to the west of the city of Toronto. I've put my nice green rectangle around that. And the background is the sheet that you look at online to see where the Greenbelt boundaries are in your area. Okay, and so honestly, this just breaks my heart. I'm usually so much better than this. Oh well, okay. Note to self, set up phone computer. So on the left we have the Halton plan. So this is the Halton comprehensive official plan, and the purple areas are the purple areas and the green areas are either in the Greenbelt Plan, the protected countryside, or in the Niagara Escarpment Plan. So this is the upper tier plan having those boundaries in it and all the policies that go along with it. And in the middle is a little schematic that I stole from their website, and it shows there are 4 municipalities in Halton. And I'm going to show you Halton Hills, the one on the upper east, in a second. So see what this turned out like. Woo, okay. So the town of Halton Hills is part of the region of Halton. So it's a local municipality. It has towns within it, Georgetown, Acton within it, and the orange and the seafoam color are the protected countryside and the Niagara Escarpment. So those policies are also in the local plan for the local planners to use. On the right-hand side is the town of Oakville, which is a lakeshore municipality, and the Greenbelt Plan is just the little green bit. It's in the northern area, and then you can see it also comes down the urban river valley. And so that's how the designations work in there. So the big idea versus the real world. In my opinion, having the protected countryside was the first time that many farmers in Ontario were actually subject to a land use designation. And why I say this is because in my experience, when we used to look at official plans and we saw the agricultural designation, everybody read it as future urban, right? So that's what people thought. If it was agriculturally zoned, it was future urban, and that was the practice. When we talk about theory and practice, well, this was the practice that everybody assumed. And so as my colleagues have said before me, what's changed now is that agriculture is actually agriculture. And so how do we keep it agriculture? How do we work with that over the long term and make it continue to be agriculture? Land use planning is a very limited tool, as we're finding out, especially on the Greenbelt Council, and having people come to us and say what challenges they're having as farmers in the area. Land use does one thing, taxation does many other things. There are many other ministries and tools and programs that help farmers and help others make their everyday lives work and make it all make sense for them. And then the Friends of the Greenbelt Foundation, I don't know if this is a unique thing, but it seems like it to me, that to do a land use plan, the province created the land use plan of the Greenbelt Plan and then created a body that championed it. So we had the Friends of the Greenbelt Foundation going around and saying to people at hockey games, throwing out Greenbelt t-shirts and saying, the Greenbelt's really good, here's what the Greenbelt is, did you know the Greenbelt's in your area? They put up signs on all the roads so you know when you're entering the Greenbelt, although my kids, knowing that I study it, we drive in and the kids are like, oh, so Mom, that's the Greenbelt, like, so what's the big deal, you know? And then they do a lot of programs where they either help local farmers switch into new kinds of crops, help young farmers get into the business where they might not have had kind of an ancestral farm to work with. They've done all sorts of very interesting things, promoting local food and different kinds of local food, farmers markets, those sorts of things. So if you're interested in that, you should check it out. But my concern is that farmers are in a global economy, and there's only so much you can really fight back at the local level. And certainly watching the news and reading about the farmers in this area here, where, perfect crop last year, best ever, couldn't move it. I mean, land use planning can only do so much, and there's so much more to be done. Stephen Harper. Okay, so the countryside is where nature is. This was actually also brought up by Mr. Pollock earlier, that we have this idea now that the countryside is where nature is, that we've preserved our countryside in Toronto, and a lot of the tone of thinking about development in the Toronto area is a great concern to me. So this is a view. It was my kid's birthday, and I was in the CN Tower just a couple of months ago, and I guess there's still snow on the ground, although here that would have been yesterday. So the condos in downtown Toronto, I mean, this is a real live view about the condos and how fast they're going, and where's the nature there? That actually kind of really concerns me. And then for whom is the countryside preserved? Many of the people who fought for the Greenbelt Plan were people who live in the Greenbelt Plan. The woman who was the head of the board that oversaw the Friends of the Greenbelt Foundation lives in the countryside. And she was like, I get all my local food and I do this and I do that. And I looked at her and I was like, can you at least acknowledge your privilege in being able to live in this landscape and have the time to do this kind of work? Because certainly, especially in Toronto, we have all kinds of issues with social justice and the ability of people to actually get to these spaces that we've conserved. And then the White Belt. I was going to put this at the beginning with one of the plan areas, but I thought it might be confusing. Everybody talks about the White Belt. So when the Greenbelt Plan was first put into place, there was an idea that the southern boundary of it was, depending on who you talk to, the Hempson version was 50 years out in terms of growth. So from the existing built-up boundary, say at the northern edge of Brampton, it would be 50 years of greenfield area left before you hit the bottom of the Greenbelt. Some people say it's 30 years, but there's a white belt. And one of the biggest surprises that happened was that when the Greenbelt was put into place, each of the municipalities that had part of that white belt in them, rather than looking at them, this is like the politicians, rather than looking at it as a place where you're going to develop next, people said, well, hang on, that's all the countryside we have left, we have to move to protect that. And so if you Googled the town of Markham and the food belt, they wanted to make that into their agricultural area and have all of the growth, 100% of the growth in the town of Markham, which is a huge municipality, grows really fast. They wanted it all to be within the existing urban area. And this is like a mostly new suburban, so you would actually be asking people on existing lots to, do different things, and kind of crazy. Okay, so what's next? Whoops. Oh, I have to go back. Can I go back? You can't go back, Laura. Future. Oh, what's next? Okay, sorry. The future of the Toronto bioregion. So what's next is continuing to think about the bioregion. So continuing to think about that tension between the environmental future, both in terms of nature conservation and agricultural land conservation. And what's next? Toronto is growing immensely. It has over 8 million, the Greater Golden Horseshoe has over 8 million people now, and we're supposed to grow by the year 2041 to 13 plus million people. So where the heck are those people going to live, and where are they going to work, and is the Greenbelt going to be enough so that this there will be enough carrying capacity of nature to serve us all? And then the issue with leapfrogging, a lot of people thought the Greenbelt was going to literally stop sprawl, but hey, guess what? We live in a democratic society, and people choose to live wherever they want because we like that. So people are actually choosing to move out, and they're moving out to Kitchener-Waterloo, they're moving out to Guelph, they're moving out to Barrie, which is further north, and putting pressure on cottage country and Simcoe County. I won't go into the details, but there's other countrysides that are now at risk, and not just a near urban Toronto countryside. And finally, growing the Greenbelt, something I never would have predicted is that the urban municipalities within the Greenbelt area are saying, we want the Greenbelt in our area. So Mississauga, Toronto, and I think it's Markham have passed designations to designate all of their river valleys as Greenbelt. And it's a huge political mind shift, I think, that we're experiencing. And so I'm wondering if there will be other areas over the longer term. We're up for a provincial election in June. Hopefully, no matter what government comes in, the Greenbelt Plan will be stable. And then we're up for a 10-year coordinated review of the growth plan and the Greenbelt Plan, including the other plans. And the 10-year coordinated review is of interest because it's the only time people can apply to have a boundary shift. You can't do it on an ongoing basis. It's only once every 10 years. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so thank you very much.